Hello. This is my self-assessment for chapters 11 and 12, and I have my notes right over here, so if I keep looking down, that's why. In 11.2, the self-assessment for that, we looked at the covenantal relationship between employee and company. And so how much does an employee feel tied to their company, irregardless of circumstance? And I received a 27 out of 40 on that questionnaire, which I think is probably about what I would have expected. I think it might be slightly higher, actually, than I thought that it would be. I looked at the last organization I worked for, which was YZ Free Church, and I think that it's only that high because, which isn't even that high, but I think it's that high because I believe in the mission of the church, and so I feel tied and committed to servant-hearted leadership, serving even when you don't want to, not being recognized, not being seen, being working in a sacrificial mentality. And so if it was a different company, if it wasn't a church that I was working for, I think my score would have been much lower. My superior would it kind of give attention to subordinates who seemed neglected, but there were a couple subordinates that were always neglected that he didn't give attention to, and he would not delegate opportunities that would help me learn or grow. Those were things that I needed to ask for, not just ask for, but then seek out and sort of make happen myself. So I was really in charge of my own development. But he did treat every subordinate as an individual with individual needs. So fairness necessarily wasn't really important as much as looking at everybody's circumstance and adjusting expectations for that, which I did appreciate. And he didn't really coach very much. If you asked him and you really sought that out and you set time on his calendar, he would do that. And he did coach newcomers. Like when I came on for the first 6 weeks, I think I met with him a lot more frequently, and then after that it was kind of like he just assumed I would come to him if I needed anything, which was fine. It worked well for me, but for other employees it did not work so well for. But when I look at the organization, the company as a whole, I scored lower on those things, and so I don't feel like they treated their employees very well. It was kind of expected that because you were a Christian, you were just going to work really hard and we were going to get the most out of you. And I didn't feel like we were valued, or it wasn't the kind of place that I would want my friends necessarily to work at, because I knew that if someone else worked there, they would have been talked about or judged based on one instance. Like if they had tried to do a project and it did not go well, people were kind of thrown under the bus, and I think that was seen as just talking honestly about how we were doing, but it wasn't done in a manner that really honored the employee, and so that was tricky. So I personally didn't feel committed to YZ Free as a whole, but I did feel committed to the church as a whole. So that is assessment 11.2. And then when we move into chapter 12, we looked at individual versus collectivism. I really enjoyed this because a couple years ago I studied Hofstede, not in great length, but I mean I read a few books and definitely got my bearings around that. And when I had taken tests a couple years ago, I saw how individualistic I was, which was very surprising for me. I thought I was much more collectivist. And in taking these questionnaires, I'm realizing maybe a little bit more of why. So I'll come back to that in 12.2, but in 12.1, I didn't feel like preserving the welfare of other people is really important to me. So I did score higher on the collectivism versus individualism for this particular assessment. I got 39 out of 50 for collectivism, and 27 out of 50 for individualism. But in assessment 12.1, I think that's because it was a lot more about the group as a whole. And so having safety and stability within the group, being able to live in a stable society, being polite to others, restraining my behavior so it doesn't harm others, those are all things that I scored as a 5. And then any of the personal recognition stuff is not nearly as important to me, so those were a lot lower. But things like avoiding violation of social norms, I don't really care about that, and people in collectivist societies would care a lot more about what's expected of them because it could look bad on the in-group. And for me, that's something that I think, because I live in an individualistic society, I know I'm being judged as my own person, and so I don't need to take into consideration how I look, how I make someone else look. Like, even within my own family, if I completely disagree with my husband, I know that in our society, I'm looked at as my own person, and so it doesn't make him look bad necessarily that I respond poorly. It makes me look bad if I respond poorly. And so I think for that, I'm much more individualistic, but I think if I was in a collectivist society, that would change, because I would realize that I was harming someone else, and harm for me is huge as a motivation for my behavior. So in self-assessment 12.2, we looked at that, and there, when we were looking at the moral foundations, our own moral foundations, the relevance and our judgment, and so harm, fairness, and then in-group and loyalty, and then authority and purity were the 5 categories that we were given, and I got a 19 out of 20 on harm. So that is a huge motivator for me. If I don't want to hurt people, I am willing to take the heat to really any extent if that means saving someone else pain, and I'm willing to bend rules if that means saving somebody else pain. And I think that's from my own upbringing of experiencing so much pain that I just want to save other people from that. But fairness, authority, and then in-group loyalty items, I scored all a 5 on. And I was really surprised about the loyalty items, because I think of myself as a very loyal person. But I think about when I think of loyalty, I think of the willingness to sacrifice one's own desires for other people's, and to stick with them no matter what. But I don't necessarily think of agreeing with them. It just means like sitting with them, or not leaving them, not abandoning them. And with this questionnaire, they're looking at loyalty from a slightly different perspective of resonating with a group mentality or image. And I don't think I feel the need to brand myself similarly to other people in order to be loyal to them. I view those as very distinct things. So I think that made sense as I was processing it. And then purity was kind of a middle ground of an 11 item. I don't think that that's near, to me, actually, even when I'm answering the questions about purity, the reason that I would mark something as important is because it would harm someone else. So I think that people kind of can do what they want with their, I don't think they should do what they want with their body. I want everyone to treat themselves as fully human, but I'm less concerned with someone degrading themselves as I am with the harm that could cause others. So cause their children or cause the society. And so the questions that would have an implication of harming other people because of one's own purity heighten the importance of that for me. And so then the last little bit I was going to say was when I looked at table 12.1, it kind of gave different issues, and then whether or not we took a collectivist or individualistic approach to it. And I was looking at the false information. So I know as a Christian, like, we shouldn't lie, but in an individualistic society, we would lie to protect our own privacy. And I think for me, I don't feel the need to have any privacy, mostly because I think whatever you find out that is accurate of me, so I deserve whatever repercussion comes with that. And because I think I crave love and acceptance, but I want to know that it's real. And so if I don't have privacy and people can see whatever they want to about me, in a sense, then I can know that they actually do accept me for who I am. But in a collectivist society, it says lie to protect the group or family. And that is something that I can see that I have done. And so that was interesting when I compare that to like my own. I don't feel the need to necessarily change my own behavior in order to not make someone else look bad, because I know that we're being judged on different scales because we lived in an individualistic society. But if it comes to like me having to cover for them, which I guess is changing my behavior, but in order to save them from something, I'm willing to do that even though I know it's morally wrong. And so I'm not necessarily proud of that. I just think that that was a insight for me in doing these self-assessments. And then laws, the other thing as I was going through this table that stood out to me was laws in an individualistic society were the same for all. And in collectivist, they vary according to tradition and status. And that was tough for me because I don't feel the need for fairness. I don't think our world is fair. I don't feel a righteous anger toward a lack of fairness. I'm comfortable with people having a different approach, which is more individualistic. But I also don't think that things should just change based on your status. And so I am fine with things kind of adapting to tradition, but as soon as like we throw in the word status there, that was something that really rubbed me the wrong way too. So I felt like I couldn't really fit into either of the categories for laws. And then there were other categories that I felt like I very much fit into the individualistic one, and other ones where I felt I very much fit into the collectivist one. And so I feel kind of confused as to whether I lived in a collectivist society, how much more I would bend to that way, because I do care so much about harming other people or their welfare. And I'm fine with me as an individual suffering for that, but I'm not okay with low human rights or status mattering more than a human being. So those were my learnings from chapter 11 and 12, and I really enjoyed, especially chapter 12. It was really insightful. So thanks for listening. All right, bye.